Welcome to Ladies Talking Leafs. I'm Chris.
And I'm Sil.
And it's 1 week since the Leafs lost in Game 7 to the Boston Bruins. A familiar story, unfortunately. And we knew there would be a lot of news coming out of this playoff exit. And so here we are with a bonus episode. So we knew that we would be doing this bonus episode, kind of. But before we get into the show, we want to remind you BetOnline is your number one source for all your summer sports this season with the NHL and NBA playoff stats, MLB, and golf. All the latest stats, news, scores available to follow your favorite teams. Get the latest odds and lines, including the latest team matchups, player props, and odds on just about every sport out there.
Head to the website today, betonline.ag, or use your mobile device to get in on the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Please gamble responsibly. If you or someone you know needs support or advice, reach out to Connex Ontario or an organization near you. Place your limits and stay within it.
Okay, so let's start off with some positivity in the PWHL. We still have a Toronto hockey team in the playoffs. Yay! PWHL Toronto are up 2-0 in their best of 5 semifinal series versus Minnesota. They could be headed to the first ever PWHL finals if they win on Monday night in Minnesota. So I don't know. I saw actually after the, I'll be truthful, I didn't actually watch the game too. I only saw the highlights of it. But I mean, the crowd looked amazing. And they interviewed a few of the fans coming out of the rink, and there was a couple of young girls there, and they were like, at least we have still some playoff hockey. And I was like, yes, girls. I said, that's true. And, it's nice to see, I guess, on a Toronto team that the stars have shown up in this series, right?
Big time. Big time.
So like Natalie Spooner, Renata Fast, Blair Turnbull, the captain, they've all produced. And that's what you need from those players, from your big time players. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, they're definitely showing everyone how it's done. And let's hope that some of this energy can be kind of transmitted our big hockey club, because they could sure learn a few things from these women and the way that this organization is run as well. So yeah, so let's hope they keep it going and we get our first championship in a long time in hockey here soon.
Yeah.
So on a personal note, we wanted to let you know about an interesting opportunity that came our way on the heels of Keith's exit. We were invited on CBC Radio's afternoon show Here and Now Toronto with host Ramraj Shavrendran to comment on Keith's dismissal and give our post-playoff reaction.
Yeah, so this was the first time for us to be interviewed like this, and it was an awesome experience. If you would like to hear the interview, you can find the link to it in our show notes, and we will be posting an excerpt from it on social media as well. So look out for that.
Yeah, it was a great experience. So now it's time to get into the Leafs post-playoff fallout. And for this bonus episode, we have invited our Ladies Talking Leafs insider, Mike Augello, on, who we know will have a lot to say after yet another early Leafs exit. So without any further ado, let's talk Leafs.
Okay, with yet another early playoff exit for the Leafs, of course, there's no shortage of news to talk about, and we welcome our LTL insider, Mike Augello, to talk all about it.
Mike, of course, covers the Leafs and the NHL as a reporter and as a member of the Professional Hockey Writers Association. You'll find the Leafs coverage on hockeybuzz.com, and he is co-host of Off the Post Radio and the Leafs Convo. Mike is also the site manager for the Hockey News covering the Buffalo Sabres. Thanks for coming on the show again, Mike. We wish it could be under better circumstances.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. And gee, it's just going to be positivity and sunlight for the next how long we talk.
Of course.
Yeah. But I wanted to ask you, actually, since you are a member of the Professional Hockey Writers Association, don't you get a vote for the NHL awards? Or
I did the last 2 years. Now it's sort of on a rotating basis. This year I did not.
Okay.
But I did vote for all the awards, the Hart, the Selke.
Yeah.
The last 2 years. And so, I mean, this year I did the voting just, to keep in practice, and, I did not vote for Connor McDavid for the Hart. It was
okay.
Nathan McKinnon.
Right. Yeah. That's for last year or this year?
For this
year.
Season. Yes. Yeah.
This last season. Okay. All right. Oh, interesting. All right. Cause I didn't know that, but let's go on to our Leafs here. Okay. Auston Matthews was nominated anyway. So did you nominate?
He was in my top 5
for the Hart. Yeah.
I voted him 4th. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Yeah. A lot of people seem to do that. It's interesting with the Ted Lindsay where the players voted him in for that award, but that
says a lot.
Yeah, but the writers didn't vote for him for the Hart. But anyways, all right. So let's start with the player comments from the end of season interviews with the Leafs. We'll talk about Marner's comments in a minute. But did any other player, anything that they said, catch your attention at all from any of the others?
I mean, really, it was just sort of boilerplate. I mean, obviously, it was just really. I mean, Nylander and Tavares and Matthews, they basically said the same thing that they have said the last few years. I think the only departure was Morgan Riley, who I think was, genuine in his, I think he recognized, well, it didn't work. It's not working. He's not throwing his teammates under the bus, but I think there's a realization there that there's just so many times you can go to the well. And at a certain point, you're going to have to say this just doesn't work anymore. And I think he was, I wasn't in the scrum, but apparently it looked like he had almost tears in his eyes because he knows that this group is likely not going to be together again.
Right. Yeah. Because I just found like John Tavares too, like him saying that we're right there again. Yeah. It's like, where exactly is right there, right where you have been the past 8 years sort of thing, or 6 years for him.
For him though, like really when he was on Long Island, they didn't really have much playoff success there either. So is this not just what he knows? Just being close, but no cigar. Like that seems to me like I was just thinking about that the other day, that really he doesn't have really great playoff track record from either team.
Well, I think the two franchises have a lot of similarities in the fact that they didn't surround that group with enough quality players to enable them to win. In New York, it was more the fact of structure and incompetent ownership. And with Toronto, it's paying the core group half your salary cap, and then the pandemic happening. There was a lot of outward situations. I mean, he won one round in New York in, I think, 8 years, and now he's won one round in Toronto in 6 years. So he's ahead. I mean, he's ahead of the, the thing is, it's like, he's the captain. So he's not going to throw anyone under the bus, but, to the statement of we're right there. You're right there where? You're right there where you almost beat the Bruins, a team that did not have a number 1 or arguably a number 2 center, and who is getting their ass handed to them by the Florida Panthers. So I almost said it was merciful that this team lost in Game 7 to Boston, because right now they'd be getting destroyed by the Panthers like the Panthers destroyed them last year.
Yeah.
And what did you think? True. Yeah. What did you think of Auston Matthews and the whole thing where he said about being like, we pick a scapegoat, I guess, for the, there's always a scapegoat in Toronto and all that. It was kind of like, I don't know. I just don't like this whole mentality of them thinking like everything is like we're all against them. We're not against them. Like
I didn't take it that way at all. I didn't take it that way at all, but I do think there is always a scapegoat. There is. There is always a narrative where there's somebody that's pointed at as the person who is most at fault. Yeah. I think that is true. And I don't think he said it to me, with any malice. He did say, and rightfully so, which most people are omitting that part of his quote.
Right.
He said that. And rightfully so.
And rightfully so.
Just like they're omitting the part with Mitch Marner's comments too, though.
Yeah, for sure.
They omitted a lot because when he moving on to that part.
X Twitter for you. It's sound bites for really short attention spans. The majority of people didn't post the full quotes. I think a few people did. I think you did, didn't you?
I did both. I see, because I was listening in the moment, and I was transcribing as it was played. So like what I could type in was "we're kind of gods."
Yeah.
The first line, and then I went back and I put the entire context. And I think that was necessary because it does have a different meaning because it sounds like, we're kind of gods, like that kind of like full of themselves. Well, I mean, yes, they're put up on a pedestal by a fan base of the richest franchise and the biggest fan base probably in the league. And it's getting to be like the fan base of the Red Sox and the Cubs, who are just a bunch of people who are, I think now, addicted to pain. Because, really, with a lot of teams, the pain inflicted on this franchise, a lot of their fan base would say, screw this, I'm going to find another team. This team and this fan base, they're so loyal that they keep coming back, because it'll make them enjoy it even more when they finally win. But will we all be alive when they do?
That's the big question. Yeah, but I have to say, me and Sil have said for years that we do treat these players as gods. So when he said that, and his whole comment, like, to me, I didn't think there was anything wrong with it.
No, and I think the problem is he omitted the word treated. He forgot to say that word,
Right.
He just said, we're kind of like gods, but what I think he meant to say is we are kind of treated like gods.
Right.
Yeah. Which would change the context a little bit. But what all he was saying is that he is aware of how the players are elevated and that they're not really measuring up, and that he understands that he's grateful for that. Right.
And then he referenced Raptors players who were part of that championship group, like Siakam and Anunoby and, Kawhi, who left by free agency, who he said are no longer with the team. So he sort of, in a way, admitted that, I want to stay around because I want to be treated like those guys were treated, but those guys were also traded. So maybe it was almost an admission that, hey, I may not be here longer, but in a way that's up to, and we're going to talk about that, but in a way that's all up to him. That decision's all on him.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, let's move on from the players and talk a little bit about what happened on the coaching front this week. So I think we all expected that Sheldon Keefe was probably not going to last out the week. No. Obviously, this is a results-based business, and having only one playoff series win in 5 seasons with the Leafs, it was an obvious move that they were going to let go of the coach. From his press conference on Monday and then the video that he put out after he was let go, what did you take from his comments? And who do you think might be the next head coach of the Leafs?
Well, I'll just say this, and everybody has sort of echoed this. I don't, if in terms of the list of people to blame for the downfall of this team over the last few years, Sheldon Keefe is not at the top of the list. I think the explanation that Brad Treliving and Brendan Shanahan made on Friday, I think was pretty accurate. At a certain point, even a good person, even a good coach, the message gets stale. The players start to tune it out. Not that they're ignoring the coach, but it doesn't work. There's been too much failure, too much down the road that there just has to be a change. He's a good coach. I don't know if he's a great coach, but he's a good coach. And there are certain tactical things that people who sort of, nitpick online will say, well, he didn't match up lines, or he didn't overload, this or do that. Again, it's like, I'm of the opinion that the coach is only as good as the players that he has to use and manipulate in terms of beating the other team. And like when he had Ryan O'Reilly as a third line center, lo and behold, they won a playoff series. When you give that coach a good team and a deep team, he was able to win that year. That last year they overloaded. They brought in Luke Shen. They brought in Achari. They brought in O'Reilly. They won. This year, they didn't do as much. The roster wasn't as strong, and they lost to a team that had a lot of flaws. I mean, I said 2 months ago, I would rather play Boston than Florida because I knew they would lose to Florida, but I thought there was a chance they could break the psychological advantage that the Bruins had. No, I guess not. But, he's going to get hired maybe even in the next week. I mean, there's a possibility he's going to interview for the Devils job. And if he doesn't, he's got the sort of golden parachute of the 2-year contract, the extension that he signed last year. So he's got some options. I do think, and this is the thing that's sort of, and this has been brought up by a couple people. I know that my buddy Steve Dangle brought this up, and I think it's, and Adam Wilde and Jesse Blake, the guys on SDPN, made this point, and it's really accurate. They gave Keefe the extension last summer. Why? Because they fired Kyle Dubas, and they did not want a wholesale change, and they did not want to have Brad Treliving, coming in, having to deal with free agency, and then also having to deal with finding a new coach. They wanted some continuity. So they decided, okay, we'll give Sheldon Keefe an extension, like they gave Randy Carlyle an extension back in, I think it was 2013, and then they ended up firing him the following January. That's what they did here, and it's money. MLSE, they'll spend it. That's not a problem. But the thing is, if you're talking about change and the need for change and when the change was needed, if you were going to fire Sheldon Keefe for cause, it would have been last summer and not this summer. He actually did a pretty good job this year with a team that was not as good as it was last year, and had to endure a bunch of things like Marner being out for a month and Riley being out for a while, and all the things they had to deal with, and in the playoffs dealing without having Nylander, having Matthews, having Joseph Wall in Game 7. He did a good job. It was just time to move on.
Yeah, I didn't think he got outcoached this time around as badly as in past rounds. That is true. Yeah, but what about his comments afterwards? What did you think of that?
I mean, I think he knew he was going to get fired. I think that is the reason why he owned so much of. I mean, there was a lot of ownership over this week.
Yeah.
It's like,
except the players. That's what I was going to say. The players really didn't say it, like to come out
everyone,
and say
except for Morgan Riley, pretty much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. There was a lot of ownership from management, but only one lost their job, and that was Sheldon Keefe. And that was because he was on the job for 5 years. If there's anybody who deserved, after taking ownership of the failings to get fired, it was Brendan Shanahan, but he didn't. And ironically, Brendan Shanahan is sort of in the same position that Sheldon Keefe was last summer. He comes in, he stays on because Keith Pelley just came in and he doesn't want to change everything over. So Brendan gets to stay, whereas Sheldon got to stay. So, and it's not a meritocracy. It's not based on what they did. It's based on how many years are left in their contract and where, what the transition situation is with MLSE, when it should be, did you do a good job? If you did, stay. If you didn't, get the hell out. But, I think Sheldon owned it. I think he admitted, maybe that some mistakes were made, and he had a lot of challenges when it came to the roster. Losing your best player for 2.5 games or 2 2/3 games, I think it was, and him not being at 100% going into Game 7, having your second best forward out for the first 3 games, having one of your better forwards really not play well for the first half of the series. Your goaltender, sort of going back in time to, Sammy the Sieve, it's, and then you have Joseph Wall play up to the expectations that I had, and then he gets hurt. on a meaningless goal at the end of game 6. I mean, you can't make this crap up.
Yeah.
You just can't.
Yeah.
I mean, like
especially that goalie, like Joseph.
That was just so meaningless. Like, I know you're in the moment, but it was a pointless move, whatever that was.
And that's where when they say they're cursed, like that's one play that I could say I can see that.
That was the I would show you the text message on my phone from my brother when I texted him and said Samsonov is playing game 7, and he uttered a few expletives and said, "This team is cursed."
Yeah.
Okay. So, but what about there's like a lot of potentials for the next coach. So, who's your pick for the top prospect in this?
Well, there's who everybody is saying is the top prospect, and then there's who I think would be the best coach, but
give us both.
Okay. Who everybody's saying is Craig Berube.
I don't have thumbs down on that one personally.
Yeah, I don't have anything really against him other than the fact that he won 1 Stanley Cup. He was not a great coach in Philadelphia. He gets the job in St. Louis. He does a good job in the second half of that year, as the I think he replaced, I think it was Mike Yeo. Wins a cup. I mean, can't take anything away from him there. Had a hot goaltender in Jordan Binnington. Everything went right, and he won a game 7 in Boston. Hire him right for that. But things faded in St. Louis. I saw somebody point out online that, Doug Armstrong didn't exactly do a great job in terms of keeping that team together. The Alex Pietrangelo going to Vegas was a big loss. And then, they replaced him with Torrey Krug, who isn't exactly a Craig Berube type of defenseman. So there were a number of things that led to his downfall in St. Louis. I just don't know whether he's the right fit for this team. I mean, they're going to really have to change, and maybe this is a good point. They need to change the roster. So maybe the type of team they need and the type of team that he can coach is where they need to go. But there's going to have to be a lot of changes with the roster. The guy who I think should be at the top of their list is Joel Quenneville. Now, that has a whole boatload of issues. I mean,
especially with the history of this organization.
Yes, it does. But
the optics of that would be horrible.
Well,
absolutely horrible.
The question is, would the optics, I somehow think that it can be dealt with in one press conference at the beginning. The first press conference, he'll be grilled and excoriated, and maybe there'll be a lot of people who will be critical of it because of that history at Maple Leaf Gardens and what happened. But in the end, and not to re-legislate 2010 and Kyle Beach, but in the end, it's a question of, was he primarily responsible for everything that happened, or was he a symptom of a larger problem that went to Stan Bowman and John McDonough and the entire organization? I mean, I'm not, that's up to Gary Bettman. Once Gary Bettman says you're free and clear to coach, then that should be gone. Now, in Toronto, with the media being the way it is, and justifiably so, I mean, they will ask those questions. He would have to be prepared to answer those questions. The Leafs have a very good PR staff. I'm sure they would prep him. It's just a question of whether they're open to going down that road. And I don't know. I mean, the whole thing first would be find out whether he's available. The other one that's the curveball is Rod Brind'Amour.
That's my pick.
Yeah. Now, this is the thing.
But even with him, his power play right now is in the toilet. So I don't know. There is that. We would be getting him after his best coaching stint. Let's just say, especially if they go out tonight in 4.
Yeah. Well, one thing, don't hire Guy Boucher as your power play specialist.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah.
But I mean, he's an excellent coach. I'm sure he would not admit this publicly, I'm sure he's very tired of being underpaid by Tom Dundon. I did a little research for writing, cause I know about Brind'Amour, but I don't know, his wife is from the Carolinas, I think her father was a basketball coach from NC State or something like that. And, so his family is very ingrained in the Carolinas. So he's been there ever since he retired. So he's been there for, I think, 12, 13, 14 years. So if he got paid, if he gets his assistants hired by Dundon, then he's probably going to stay there. But there is some question that after they went out at the deadline and trade for Jake Gensel and traded for Kuznetsov, and they're getting reasonably good goaltending, and they still lose to the Rangers and get swept by the Rangers, whether Dundon is going to say, okay, he's been head coach here for 6 years. It's time for a change. 6 years is usually the drop dead point for most coaches. So, it's time to move on. And if he's out there on the market, Toronto, Seattle, Ron Francis is his former boss with the Canes. I'm sure he's going to be entertaining offers, and the Leafs should be at the head of that list, whether they will be or not. I mean, I don't get the impression they're rushing into things to get somebody like on Monday to have another press conference and say, hey, here's Craig Berube. No, they got to get this right. So take your time.
I, for one, am happy about that they're not going to rush into it. And I honestly think that it's going to hold up most of the other hires, I think, out there, unless some teams are kind of more in a rush, because I'm pretty sure that most of these guys that are in the running for these openings, if they could get the Leaf job, they would want to take that one. So until that one's off the table, I think that's when the dominoes will fall after that.
Right.
Back to Quenneville for a second. Do you think he's been out of the game for a bit too long though? It's been a while. It's been a few years, and things kind of change in this league.
It's only two years,
2.5.
2.5.
Something like that.
That seems like a lifetime.
Yeah, no, he was replaced.
He was doing well in Florida. That's where he was last, right?
Yeah, he was. In whoever I'm drawing a blank. The current Nashville coach.
It's Andrew Burnett.
Thank you.
Yeah.
He replaced him and, did a great job. And then he got let go when they had a chance to get Paul Maurice, and he went to be assistant with Lindy Ruff in New Jersey, and now is head coach in Nashville. So, it was a good team. He was doing a good job. And then everything with the Chicago situation happened. I don't think it's past him. And then one concern is I believe he's 65 years old.
Right.
And, but Lindy Ruff is 64 and he just got hired. So that seems to be, that's the new trend. It's like, okay.
I don't know. For a hockey man, I'm pretty sure if someone's willing to give them the job, they're going to take it. Right.
Yeah. Have you heard anything about Mike Sullivan? Maybe us doing a trade with Kyle Dubas and, coaches? Yeah. Any rumors there?
No, no. There had been some scuttlebutt about Sullivan being interested in the New Jersey job, and that, Sullivan would go to Jersey, and, then Keefe would go into Pittsburgh. See, that's why I think Keefe, everybody's going to put.
I'm just seeing that on here. There's all these things about Penguins hockey writers, it says, or hockey, actually it's the Hockey News, where you're covering the Buffalo Sabres, but it says the Penguins named the top landing spot for Sheldon Keefe.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh.
Would that kind of be a joke though? Really? I don't know.
Well, let's just say this. It's only possible if Sullivan decides he doesn't want to be there anymore. And honestly,
he's still got a lot of years on his deal though. No,
yeah, right. And that's that's why I'm saying, if he gets an equivalent job, okay, look where the Penguins are. You've got a decrepit core with, a great player in Crosby who can still play. Malkin, Letang are falling apart. You're overloaded. Your cap is overloaded. Kyle Dubas took that job because he wanted to get right back in the game, but he made sure he got a 7-year contract because he's going to have to remake that team on the fly. And I mean, that is a extremely challenging job. And, I could see them like finishing, in a couple of years, finishing at the bottom of the league and drafting first overall. Like that hasn't happened in Pittsburgh before. But if that happens, I don't know if I was Sheldon Keefe, I'd want to take that job. New Jersey with Jack Hughes and Heeshear and Luke Hughes. And that's a team with a lot of young talent.
And actually that's kind of his forte as well.
Right.
Like that really suits him and his coaching style. He's really heavy on development. I think that actually would be a great landing spot for him.
But,
yeah,
I could see Sullivan wanting to bail on the Penguins to go to the Devils, but I mean, easier said than done. I mean, I don't know if he is going to be able to extricate himself from the Penguins unless he says, I don't want to be here anymore. And I don't foresee that happening. It doesn't sound like that's going to happen. So my guess here is Keefe takes a year and waits. And then if Sullivan decides after next year, if the Penguins miss the playoffs and he decides to go someplace else, that Keefe ends up going to Pittsburgh. I mean, I will always put Keefe and Dubas together because they've always been together. It only makes too much sense. It just makes too much sense.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move off of the coaching now and go to the management. The management press conference was on Friday, and MLSE CEO Keith Pelley, Leafs presidents Brendan Shanahan, and GM Brad Treliving spoke to the media. And from what was said, if we read between the lines, it seems like changes are finally going to happen to the team. Did you see it that way? And
cross
our fingers, say yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just say, well, and I'll say what I said in my column today on Hockey Buzz. We'll see, because really this organization had an opportunity to make changes last July, before July 1st last year. The landscape of making change was much easier before July 1st last year than it is this going into this summer, because last summer, William Nylander was entering the final year of his contract. I believe he had no trade protection at all before July 1st. Then it was a 10-team no trade, but they still could have traded him up until the time they gave him $11.5 million. Then on July 1st, Mitch Marner went from no trade protection to a no move. Now you've got, as I called it in my column, Muskoka 5 2.0. Because now it's not the same situation as 2008, where you had 5 aging players. The team hadn't made the playoffs in 3 years. You had a superstar who decided to screw the organization by blocking a trade. I think it was either to Montreal or Vancouver in Matt Sundin. And then he walks in free agency and goes to Vancouver later that year. And McCabe and Tucker and Caberlet and Kubina were all over it took 3 years to trade or get rid of all 5 of them. In this instance, you don't want to get rid of Matthews. You don't want to get rid of Nylander. I don't think want to get rid of Morgan Riley. Some of the stuff that's coming out there about, well, they didn't, the core 5, and you can convince more. Your defense has been your problem the last 4 or 5 years, and you want to trade your best defenseman. That's great logic. And you're not going to shame John Tavares into, well, take the captaincy away from him, or he's not going anywhere. He doesn't want to go anywhere. He wants to finish out the rest of this contract in Toronto. He's got 3 young kids. No. And if you somehow bully him and say, John, we don't want you anymore, you will never get another high profile free agent to ever come to Toronto. This organization, their reputation will be friggin' mud. So you cannot do it. Eat the $11 million. He's a good number 2 center. He's a good guy. Play the last year out of his contract. Then maybe you can extend him at a much cheaper rate, like we've talked about on previous shows. I think he's still an effective player. Marner.
Don't you think though with Tavares that he should give the captaincy like to Matthews? Like, don't you think it's time for that to happen? Like, they don't have to bully him and rip the C off. Like the whole Daryl Sittler situation is not even remotely close to that. But like, I don't know. I just think we were talking about this on our last show. Like, we just think like it's time it's Auston Matthews' team, right? Like, I don't know.
Okay. Well,
in the locker room though, they know what's what, right?
Right. I mean, we don't know the dynamic in the locker room. We do know, Auston Matthews is much more, ebullient, much more expressive in media availabilities. John Tavares is, he's a quiet leader, but we don't know the dynamic in the locker room. I mean, Matt Sundin was a quiet leader. You had to have Gary Roberts and Shane Corson and those guys supporting him. And really there isn't, other than Morgan Riley there, and now Matthews has sort of grown into it. I don't know if the support structure was there, Ryan O'Reilly for the 25 games that he was in Toronto.
Yeah.
I don't see it as being a big, other than being a symbolic passing of the torch. I mean, it can wait one more year, because if Tavares decides to retire at the end of next year, or if he decides to take a lesser role, it's like, okay, well, John Tavares is signing a 3-year deal at $3 million and Auston Matthews is now the captain. That's sort of seamless. That's fine. I think right now, if you say Auston Matthews is the captain, then it's like, okay, we've pulled the rug out from underneath John Tavares, and now we're, it's not necessary. It really isn't.
Right. All right. And then Mitch Marner now, going back to him and how we're saying, like, I guess if change is going to happen, even though he has the no move clause, like you were saying, that's basically where the Leafs are stuck, right? Like he has all the control in it. And I don't know, at this point, do you think it's best, like, it doesn't matter, like, just let him? I've been thinking of this the last couple of days. I had this great feeling, which I hope it happens, but I had this feeling like he was going to have a miraculous season this upcoming season. And then the Leafs are actually going to make it to the Stanley Cup final next season. He's not going to sign anything. Like, he'll just go through this next season and it's just going to happen for us for next year. What do you think about that idea?
I say spoken like a true Leaf fan on that one.
I was going to say, did you go to the dispensary for some good gummies?
Maybe it's
this. Maybe it's this Tim Hortons that I'm drinking.
There you go. Well,
it sounds good to me, though. I gotta say,
sign me up. Yeah. So I mean, this is the thing with Marner, right? And like I said, I mean, really, it's up to him. He's going to take a lot of crap this summer. That's not where this should go. Where it should go is a realization that it's just not working. Now, the question is, it depends on how the organization approaches this. If Brad Treliving goes to Mitch Marner's representative, Darren Ferris, and says, Darren, we're not going to offer you a contract. This is Mitch's last year, one way or the other, in Toronto. If he wants to play out the contract, fine. And, you want to exercise your no move clause, I get it. That's your contractual right. But if you want the 8th year on your contract, then we can talk sign and trade. And, you can negotiate with other teams, and then we can, there's a mechanism to do that. Just sort of like, his line mate from junior, Matthew Tkachuk, did with Treliving in Calgary. He went to Brad Treliving and said, I'm not going to re-sign in Calgary. So I'll give you a list and try to trade me to one of three, I think it was 3 or 4 different teams, and then it ended up being Florida. Now, you can talk about what they got and what they ended up doing. And that, in a way, led to Treliving's departure from Calgary because, they traded for Huberdeau and Uyghur, gave them both 8-year contracts. And the 8-year contract to Huberdeau, which is probably the biggest boondoggle in the NHL because, I don't think he wanted to be in Calgary, but he's not going to turn down, $10.5 million. It depends on what Darren Ferris and Mitch Marner want to do. If there's a realization there that as much as he wants to stay in Toronto, that Toronto is not going to sign him, then he can play out the deal, roll the dice, and then, he could have that year that you were talking about, Chris, and he goes on this magical run, and, he does.
And the fans are going to love him. No question.
He does a flying body block and knocks out Brad Marchand in the first round next year. And then, all of a sudden, he does all these things and everything. And then walks away in the sunset.
Yeah.
And the thing is, he may hope that the organization changes their mind like they did with Nylander, because remember, they were talking trade with Nylander up until a certain point when they didn't get the types of return that they expected. And they said, well, it makes more sense for us to sign him. No, it doesn't, because this doesn't work. Okay, next year, what will change? If everything stays the same, okay, you open up $22 million in cap space with Marner and Tavares with the expiration of their 2 contracts. Then you've got to fill those holes. Then you've got to fill a number 2 center and a number 1 winger. Good luck. That's going to be tough.
Yeah.
So, it's really a challenging situation for Treliving and the organization. And I don't think they can shame Mitch Marner into, he's only going to go if he wants to go, and he's only going to go where he wants to go. So prepare yourself for, if they make a deal, Leaf fans saying, that's all you got for Mitch Marner?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And that, and so they're under the real, they're between a rock and a hard place where they not only have to trade somebody, but they have to win the trade. And that's pretty difficult to do.
Well, I think it's almost going to be impossible for that to happen. But I think people need to start looking at, with the parity in this league, the way it is, cap space is a huge asset. You have to look at it like that. So that's what we're going to get for Mitch Marner mostly, and for John Tavares if eventually when he's off the books.
Yeah. What did you think? What did you think just going about with Shanahan though? I don't know. He didn't seem to be his usual confident self in the press conference. What did you?
Well, he shouldn't. He shouldn't. Please, on Monday, and I was joking about this, but I was sort of semi-serious. I'm sure they were looking over their shoulders to see whether the guillotine was rolling down 40 Bay. Because the reaction of the fan base was like, I want everybody dead. I want them all gone. I want, it was just okay, then after 48 hours, things calmed down a little bit, but the accountability there, remember, I give Brendan Shanahan all the credit for convincing the MLSE board, which had been, we need to make money, going back to the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund. We need to make this much money, and, we need to make at least the first round, and, all that. It's always been a sort of a bottom line business. And he convinced them, okay, we need to tank. We need to suck for a year and a half. We have a chance of getting Connor McDavid. We missed out on that. We got Marner, but that's pretty good. And then we finished dead last, and they won the lottery and got Auston Matthews. And that's set up the franchise for at least a somewhat level, a certain level of success over the last decade. I give him all the credit for that. Since then, he has been the poster child of doubling and tripling down on failure, on, building around this core four group and then reshuffling the deck chairs. Patrick Marleau, Joe Thornton, Zach Bogosian, Nick Foligno, and they surround the surrounding pieces, but never affecting the core, and then doubling down by signing them to long-term extensions and then extending them again and locking them in on no movement clauses. He owns that. He took responsibility for it on Friday. Well, you want to take real responsibility for it? Put in your notice. But he didn't do that. The organization didn't want him to do that. I don't think Keith Pelley demanded that of him. Otherwise, it would have happened, because, as Pelley said numerous times, I've only been on the job 4 weeks. He doesn't want to. There was talk that Shanahan was going to get axed and they weren't going to replace him as team president, and then there would be a direct conduit connection between Pelley and Treliving. And they were going to do the same thing with the Raptors and other. It might be too soon for that, but I do know that in the fan base, he is the one that is perceived as being directly responsible and the defender of the core. And you cannot defend that core group any longer.
Well, and he didn't. He pointed out the what did he say? He said the patterns, trends. And that you can't ignore that any longer. Mm-hmm. So,
he said there are times when you talk about patience, right? When it's the suitable call. Mm-hmm. However, when you see patterns persist and results don't change, you have to adjust how you think about things.
Mm-hmm. But to me,
that pattern has been there for 5 years.
I know.
And to me, that is the ultimate cop out, because this is the problem. Pretty much the same thing that he said in the same room, in the same month, 12 months ago, Kyle Dubas said. Kyle Dubas admitted, this is probably not working. I'm open to the possibility of change, when he was always a defender of the core, always. And then last year, after saying the stuff about, I don't want to put my family through this stuff, but it was also, I have to admit that this might not be working and that we have to be open to change. And last spring and summer was when the change needed to happen because of the contractual situations I was talking about. And what happened? They fired Dubas in a power play and hired Brad Treliving 5 weeks before the July 1st beginning of the hockey
deadline,
season, the deadline. Yeah. And it was too new for him to say, okay, well, we're going to trade Nylander, we're going to trade Matthews or trade Marner, and we have to renegotiate Matthews' contract. Oh, it was too much. It's like, okay.
So do you think that really, which what I was going to ask before, but about Dubas, then do you think he was probably fired more so because he was saying or thinking that changes need to be done last year?
I think there was part of it.
And I think is the back dealing though. Also, I think there's backdoor dealing going on.
I can't wait for Kyle Dubas's book eventually. On this.
Yeah. I think
speaking of books, Matt Sundin is coming out with a book. Yes. Did you see that?
Yes. Yeah.
I did not. I hope it's not sponsored by Hair Club for Men. No. That'll be interesting read. I will especially.
It's called Home and Away. Yeah. I think.
Oh. Mm-hmm. I thought it was going to be called I Will Not Waive My No Trade Clause.
It'll be interesting. I hope there's a good chapter on that one.
Yes. Oh yeah. I'm sure there will be. Mm-hmm. But I think that that dynamic was part of it. There was also, a situation with autonomy and reporting to the board and the being able to make trades. And I think that was a dynamic that was part of it as well. So
yeah,
I don't think even if Kyle Dubas writes his autobiography, we'll never know the ins and outs of what happened. All I know is that it crippled this organization and froze them into a certain aspect 5 weeks before decisions needed to be made. If Dubas had not been fired, they would have made those decisions for better or for worse. But now we'll never know.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. There's been so many weird timing things with this team over the last 5 years, where, stuff just happens and then it basically kind of handcuffs them a little bit, whether it's the pandemic, whatever. Don't want to make excuses, but
no,
it's just not been smooth. Anyway, there are still hockey going on in the playoffs right now. So are you watching any second round action right now?
Yeah, I'm watching. I'm in a fantasy hockey pool, so I'm watching all the games.
Mm-hmm.
I'm particularly hate watching the Vancouver Edmonton series, praying to God that the Oilers lose, just because I hate them. It's it's nothing to do with individual players. I think it's a deep-seated hate going back to Gretzky and Messier and those teams in the 80s. I just don't want to ever see that franchise ever win a Stanley Cup. They've won too many.
Well, in more recent times.
Yeah.
I guess.
Well, they haven't won in 31. Well, they haven't won one since 89 and since 90, but nobody in Canada has won since 93. So the funny thing is, I always, in terms of being a reporter, I've always wanted the Leafs to be the first to break that Canada streak or skid and be the first Canadian team since 93 to win the cup. Now it's I've softened a little bit. I wouldn't mind Winnipeg winning it. I wouldn't mind Calgary winning it. Vancouver, they hate Toronto so much that I don't know if I could go there, but I definitely do not want Edmonton, Ottawa, or Montreal winning the Stanley Cup. I would root for Satan against those three teams.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. I think Winnipeg is probably the only one that it wouldn't really bother me, but any of the others.
I think I'd be bothered regardless. You'd be
bothered, but it wouldn't be as much as the Habs or something like that, right?
Yeah, that would be.
And the Canuck. I'm not voting. Yeah.
So who's your pick then for the Cup winner, Mike?
I'm sticking with my final of Rangers versus Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
I was a little scared when Dallas lost the first two games to Vegas, and then they came back and beat Vegas in 7 games. Colorado. This is the unfairness of the NHL playoff system. And again, I really hope, apparently, I think Elliot Friedman said that there's now a growing movement to go back to the conference playoff format, because the repetitive nature of the divisional playoff format is just so boring. Every year it's Boston, Toronto, or Tampa, Toronto, or
I don't think it's creating anything either.
It's not. It's creating misery. It's creating, and but the unfairness of the fact that you had Dallas playing now. If Vegas had lost or Vegas had won, it would have been Dallas, LA, and it had been Edmonton, Vegas in the first round. And instead it was Edmonton, LA, and Dallas, Vegas. So now Vegas, who won the cup last year, shifts over to the Central Division, and you have Colorado versus Winnipeg, Dallas versus Vegas, now Dallas versus Colorado. So you have 3 of the leading candidates to come out of the West knocked out, and Edmonton, they play the LA Kings, which they play every year, and now they play, Vancouver with Arturs Svilovs in goal. And they'll walk in all fresh as a daisy into the Western Conference Final against a team that has been on 2 knockdown dragouts. Yeah. And then, Edmonton probably wins and then goes to the final against Florida or the Rangers. But I'm sticking with Dallas, and I'm sticking with the Rangers. My Rangers pick looks great. They may have 2 straight sweeps, which I wouldn't have imagined that was going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, Shesterkin's playing awesome. And it's unbelievable.
It's nice what having a good goaltender can do for you.
Yeah, that's why I guess I noticed that, right? So
but in the East, they're beating each other up. I don't know. I think
the other thing,
the Carolina series, maybe it's not as heavy, but still, there's I don't know.
But here's the thing. And you could say that this is sort of retrospective analysis. I'm having trouble talking today. That even if Toronto had won Game 7 in Boston, and everybody would have been, it would Maple Leaf Square would have been the calmest place in Toronto had they won that game. They had no chance against the Florida Panthers. That was the reason why I said, they have a better chance against Boston, because Boston, even though they had two number one defensemen in Lindholm and McAvoy, and two really good goaltenders that were better than either Leaf goaltender, although Wall played great in two games. They had Pavel Zacha and Charlie Coyle as their first and second line centers. The top two centers, of course, Matthews is out for half the series. They were better than the talent up front for the Leafs was better than the Bruins. The problem is the Bruins just play a better team concept, better team defense. And, the Leafs just, their offense dries up whenever playoffs. That's where goals go to die. So they would have won one round instead of, I think they had a chance to win one round against the Bruins. If they would have played Florida in the first round, they would have lost in 5 or 6 games. I don't have any illusion. And you can see the Bruins. Marchand is hurt. He may not play in the next game. And Pasternak is getting laid out by Sam Bennett. He's a target. And they have no answers. If it's not Bennett, it's Lomborg or it's,
Isn't that what they got Maroon for, though?
Yeah, but Maroon can't catch anybody. It's like Ryan Reeves.
I know that was halfway a joke.
Yeah. Honestly, you cannot combat a team that has 4 or 5 or 6 tough players who will hit you with one guy who's tough. It doesn't work anymore. Ryan Reeves and Patrick Maroon, they're archaic. You need 4 or 5 guys. And that's why, next year when the Leafs have Nyes and, McMahon, they need to add 2 or 3 more. They need to re-sign, if they can, Joel Edmondson. They have Benoit on the blue line. They need levels of stratification of toughness and sandpaper that can also score. If they have that, then they have a chance. But in this division against Tampa and Florida and Boston, you don't have a chance in hell unless you have layers of toughness. And that's the task in front of Brad Treliving this summer.
That's absolutely true. And when all is said and done in these playoffs, that will be our next thing that we shift to. Seeing what is out there and what Brad Treliving will do there. So anyways, Mike, thank you again for being our guest today. Anyway, everybody, you can check out Mike's Leafs blog on hockeybuzz.com. And remember, he's the co-host of the Leafs Convo as well, and Off the Post Radio covering the NHL. And you can find both shows also on YouTube. And if you don't follow him on X, make sure you do. His handle is @MikeInBuffalo. So thanks again, Mike, and enjoy the rest of the Stanley Cup playoffs.
It's always a pleasure. Talk to you again very soon.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so thanks again to Mike for coming on the show, as always, with being our Ladies Talking Leafs insider. And we covered everything, I think, from the players to the coaching to the management. And for sure, it's going to be a busy patio season for us. And that means for sure Mike is going to be joining us on the Ladies Talking Leafs patio. So look forward to doing that. But yeah, he basically, he's always not so positive, but maybe a little bit positive. I don't know, with his comments. And, I don't know. What did you think of what he had to say about, I guess more so on the management side, I think, like when it comes to Brendan Shanahan and stuff like.
I think that, most of the things he said, were valid, and not too surprising really, because After 8 years of the same thing, like there really is only one conclusion. And in fact, people that are reporting on the team like Mike have been saying these things for quite a few years now and hoping that management would finally catch up. And so looks like they have, but Mike, ever the skeptic, he is like, he'll believe it when he sees it. So, he's going to be waiting to see if they actually act on some of what they said. I don't know. I was surprised at his, mention of, Quenneville as a potential coach.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. Yeah.
But, anyway, so we'll see what happens on the coaching front as well. There's probably other people too that could be in the works that we haven't even really mentioned or that are not the big names out there, but
for sure. Cause like he said too, like they have to get it right this time, right?
They do.
There's no ifs, ands or buts about it. They gotta, at least they have to get this coaching decision right. So
yeah. And I think we are all agreed that they shouldn't make this a rush decision either. So that might mean that a so-called top candidate might be snapped up by somebody else. But I really think that, and I think we mentioned this too, that the Leafs job is the one people are going to hold out for first.
Yes.
And then everything else after that will kind of fall into place. So anyway, a reminder, as Chris mentioned, we are going to be heading to the patio soon for patio season, and we publish episodes all summer long because there is no shortage of news when it comes to Leafs, obviously. So be sure to hit that follow button wherever you listen to us and hit the subscribe button on YouTube so you don't miss any of our episodes that drop over the summer. As a quick note, we want to welcome some new YouTube subscribers as well. Nez Amarante, Dana Drake, and Josh Botticelli. Thank you so much for subscribing and watching our show.
So after everything that was said this week, and with a decision coming on a new Leafs head coach in probably the next couple of weeks, again, it's best to hit that follow button wherever you listen to our show, and we'll keep you updated on everything Leafs. At the same time, please consider leaving us a rating or review. It's so easy on Apple or Spotify, and it's important for our show to get recognized as a source for Leafs content. Our CBC interview probably doesn't happen without your endorsement, and we thank you for taking the time.
Another way to help us out is by visiting our Ko-fi page at Ko-fi.com. You can follow us there. And if you choose to, you can support us by buying us a coffee. Any donation goes towards helping us produce the show and making it even better for you. So you can find the link to our Ko-fi page on our show notes or in any of our social media profile pages.
And before we go, we wanted to share our condolences to the family and friends of former Leaf Ron Ellis. He played his whole career as a Leaf, one of only 5 Leafs that have played over 1,000 games as a Maple Leaf, 11-time 20-goal scorer, and he was a member of the 1972 Summit Series Team Canada. So Ron was also a part of the Leafs' last Stanley Cup winning team in 1967. As the club said in their release, he was a true gentleman of the game. And, and then one other thing, I guess there's only now, 6 remaining, players to play, on that team. I guess 6 members still left from that 1967 Stanley Cup winning team. So it's a sad moment, and, we send our condolences to his family and friends. And now it's time for us to go. Thank you to our healthcare workers and first responders for everything that they do.
We thank you, as always, for listening and watching Ladies Talking Leafs, presented by Bet Online. Till next time, go Leafs, go.
Go Leafs, go.
Do you believe?